Welcome to the deep dive. We take the sources you send us and really try to get to the heart of them. And today, well, when you think about America and Israel, you probably picture this incredibly strong, almost unbreakable bond, right?
Yeah, it really seems that way. It's often talked about as this constant, unwavering alliance, almost like a permanent fixture in modern
Yeah,
politics.
what if we told you it wasn't always like this? Actually, based on the historical sources you've given us, there was a time, looking back through history, where some of the key groups involved were actually bitter enemies. It's a totally different picture than maybe what you'd expect.
It really is. And what's so striking is how much the story changes over the centuries. It's definitely not static. These relationships, these allegiances, they've fundamentally shifted.
So today, that's what we're doing. A deep dive into the historical roots of Israel. We'll look at the complex, sometimes really surprising, shifts in alliances and hostilities that shaped that region for thousands of years. We're sticking strictly to the material you've shared, and honestly, it unpacks a story full of unexpected twists, big economic moves, and some very powerful prophecies. To really get it, we need to go way back, like 2,000 years back.
Right. So the source takes us to ancient Palestine. Jewish communities are living there, but they're under Roman rule, the Roman Empire. And it wasn't good. The source describes them as being treated almost like slaves. No real power.
Okay, so under that kind of Roman oppression, what was the general feeling? What were people hoping for, according to these sources?
Well, there was this deep-seated expectation, really core to their beliefs.
Yeah.
They were waiting for a Messiah, someone to save them, liberate them from the Romans. And the initial thought was this Messiah would kind of praise the Jewish scholars, work with them. But according to the source, when Isa al-Salam, or Jesus, arrived, he actually started speaking against these scholars, claimed they'd corrupted the religion. And you can imagine that caused a lot of friction.
Wow, yeah, that's not what they were expecting at all. So what does the source say happened then? What specifically turned the scholars against him so strongly?
The source states pretty clearly that this message led to a real hatred from the scholars towards Isa al-Salam. It says they actually conspired with the Romans to get him killed. And the Roman governor, apparently under pressure from them, is quoted as saying, Isa al-Salam's blood will be on you Jews and your generations. And the source recounts that the Jews reportedly accepted this, saying something like, don't worry, his blood will be on us and our generations.
Okay, but the source also says Isa al-Salam survived that plot. Yet, not long after he left, this huge war kicks off between the Romans and the Jews.
Yeah, a major, major conflict. And it was devastating for the Jewish people. The Romans completely crushed them. Thousands killed. And maybe the biggest blow, symbolically and religiously, was the destruction of their holiest site in Jerusalem, the Second Temple.
And this destruction, this defeat, led to the Jewish diaspora, right? Where Jews were forced out of Palestine, scattered across the globe for, 500 years?
That's right, 500 years. And the source really emphasizes this. For half a millennium, the dream, the longing of every Jew was to get back to Palestine. It really sets up this recurring theme you see throughout their history, exile, and this deep yearning to return.
A theme that definitely comes up again later.
Absolutely. And then, 500 years after they were kicked out, something pretty remarkable happens, according to the source. A new power rises the state of Medina. This quickly becomes the Islamic Empire, the Muslim Caliphate, and it expands fast.
Right, and under Caliph Umar bin Khattab, the Muslims defeat the Romans, or at least break their power in the region, and they take Palestine and Jerusalem. And this is where we hit a really key moment, isn't it? The Christians in Jerusalem make a demand.
Yeah, exactly. When Jerusalem surrenders, the Christians there tell Caliph Umar, okay, but no Jews allowed back in. But, and this is crucial, Caliph Umar rejects that demand. The source highlights this as a pivotal decision. He allows Jews to return to Jerusalem.
And what followed that decision?
According to the source, what followed was this incredible period, 400 years, where Jews and Muslims are described as being very good friends. They're common enemies, the Christians.
400 years? That's a long stretch of friendship, especially in that part of the world. What does the source suggest made that alliance so solid? Was it just having a common enemy, or was there more to it?
The material suggests it was likely both. Yeah, shared opposition to Christian powers definitely played a part. But there was also this period under Muslim rule in places like Al-Andalus, too, where Jewish culture and intellect really flourished. They had religious freedom. They were involved in society.
But history, as always, keeps shifting. So after 400 years of Muslim rule, Palestine changes hands again. There's a new pope in Europe, Pope Urban. And he calls for a holy war, the Crusades, to take Jerusalem back from the Muslims.
Yeah, and the source suggests the Muslim rulers at the time were kind of distracted, dealing with their own internal fights, maybe fragmented leadership. This left them pretty vulnerable. So the Christian armies came in and, well, they took Palestine pretty easily. And the source describes horrific brutality. Al-Aqsa Mosque supposedly filled with Muslim bodies, just carnage.
And it wasn't just Muslims they targeted, right? The source mentions the Crusaders' feelings towards Jews.
Oh yeah, their hatred for Jews was intense, maybe even stronger. Fueled by that old belief, the source mentioned that Jews conspired to kill Jesus. So the Crusaders went after Jewish communities ruthlessly, burning temples, synagogues, often with people trapped inside, just terrible persecution. And for 90 years, Muslims couldn't get Palestine back.
90 years.
Until a new leader emerges for the Muslims, Saladin Ayyubi. He manages to unite Muslims worldwide and launches a big counterattack to retake Palestine. And what's really interesting here, the source points out, is that during this fight, Jews globally supported Saladin.
Really? All Jews?
That's what the source claims. It even mentions the famous Jewish scholar Maimonides was apparently involved as Saladin's personal doctor during the war.
Fascinating. So Saladin wins, reclaims Palestine, and then what? Back to the previous status quo.
Pretty much, yeah. The source describes Muslims and Jews living together again in peace and with mutual respect. And not just in Palestine, but right across the Muslim world. Places like Al-Andalus, Spain, are mentioned again.
Okay, let's jump forward again. Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain. After 800 years, the Christian kingdoms finally pushed the Muslims out. What did that mean for the Muslims and Jews living there?
It meant a really tough choice. The new Christian rulers basically said, convert to Christianity or get out. Leave Spain forever.
And obviously for devout Muslims and Jews, conversion wasn't really an option, so they had to leave. Where did they go?
Well, that's when Sultan Bayezid, the ruler of the Ottoman Sultanate, steps in. He invites them to his empire, offers them refuge, says he'll look after them.
Okay, so this leads us to a really big question, doesn't it? If Muslims and Jews were allies, friends for so long, often against Christians, how did we get to a point where Jews and Christians became allies against Muslims? It's a huge flip.
It is. And the source tackles this directly. It explicitly says, forget the stories about Illuminati or black magic or jinns making people rich. It dismisses that stuff. There's actually a quote, something like, if magic could make money, the world's richest man wouldn't be Elon Musk, but some Bava.
Okay, so no magic money. What is the explanation given in the source for this massive shift in alliances and the rise of Jewish economic power?
Well, it starts with economics, really. After Columbus, sails to America, the economies in Europe and the Americas start booming, and Jews who are living in Muslim lands begin migrating towards Europe, chasing opportunity.
But they weren't exactly welcomed with open arms in Europe, were they?
Not at all. The source emphasizes that Christians in Europe still really hated Jews. They passed laws specifically to restrict them, couldn't buy land, couldn't get into politics, couldn't join the army.
Right. So basically cut off from traditional paths to power and wealth like land ownership or government service.
Exactly. So what options were left? Business. They poured all their energy into trade, becoming major merchants, accumulating a lot of actual cash. And this created a sort of imbalance.
How so?
Well, Christian wealth was mostly tied up in land, estates, that kind of thing. They might have been asset rich, but often cash poor. Jews, on the other hand, couldn't buy the land, so they had liquid capital.
Okay. And that leads to
Lending, usury, basically charging interest on loans. Jewish religious law, the source notes, forbade charging interest to fellow Jews, but allowed it for non-Jews. So they started lending money, often large amounts, to European Christians. Even kings needed loans. The source even mentions you can see references to this practice in Shakespeare's plays, so it was clearly a known thing.
And this lending, this banking activity, starts to generate serious wealth for Jewish communities.
Immense wealth. They started setting up small banks all over Europe, but there was a big risk with these small scattered banks.
What was the risk?
If a king borrowed a lot of money and couldn't or didn't want to pay it back, well, it was easy enough for him to just turn on the Jewish lenders, kill them, expel them, seize their assets. Your whole business could be wiped out overnight.
I see. So being decentralized made them vulnerable.
Precisely. They realized they needed something bigger, more centralized, an international network that a single ruler couldn't just crush. And this is where Mayor Rothschild enters the picture. The source describes him as a powerful German Jew who establishes what it calls the world's first truly international bank.
And he had a specific strategy for this, didn't he? The Five Sons.
Yeah, a brilliant strategy, according to the source. He sent his 5 sons out to establish major banks in the biggest European capitals: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt. They created this interconnected network. If one brother faced trouble, the others could pool resources and support him. No single king could take them all down.
And this family, the Rothschilds, they accumulated just staggering amounts of wealth and influence.
Absolutely staggering. The source claims they effectively funded empires. The Spanish, the French, the British. Their financial power was translating directly into political influence on a global scale.
And this influence became really apparent during the Napoleonic Wars.
Hugely apparent. The source states the Rothschilds backed the British Empire against Napoleon. They provided crucial funding, yes, but also, reportedly, intelligence. They had this network, they got news quickly, and apparently relayed it to the British Crown. Their support is presented as a really significant factor in Napoleon's eventual defeat.
And Napoleon's defeat helped cement the British Empire as the dominant world power.
Right. And by this point, the source paints a picture of Jews in Europe reaching a peak of power. They held important jobs, were highly educated, and had enormous economic control.
So after 2,000 years, having achieved this position of, well, unprecedented power and influence in Europe, the old dream starts to resurface.
Exactly. The memory of that expulsion 2,000 years earlier, that longing for Palestine, it comes back. Now, they felt strong enough maybe to actually make it happen, to go back and reestablish themselves. And this, the source says, is when Zionism begins, but initially in secret.
Secret Zionism. How did that work?
Well, the source describes about 4,000 Jews starting to quietly migrate to Palestine. They weren't conquering, they were buying land. Specifically, empty, barren land from poor Arab landowners.
And the Arabs sold it.
Apparently, yes. The source says the Jews paid double, even triple the market price, so the Arab owners were happy to sell these unproductive plots. And the Rothschild family. They were reportedly major funders behind these land purchases.
It's amazing to think the source mentions one of these barren plots called Ahuzat Bai, bought back then.
This is now Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
One of the most advanced cities in the world, built on what was basically empty land purchased piece by piece.
And it wasn't just about land, was it? There was a cultural element, too.
Definitely. As more Jews arrived, they started establishing Hebrew newspapers, Hebrew radio, TV shows. They were actively reviving the Hebrew language, bringing it back into common use after 2,000 years.
Okay, so Zionism starts secretly, building a presence on the ground. But then something shifts, and it gets a massive boost from an unexpected place.
Right. Up to now, it's mostly European-focused, operating quietly. But then across the Atlantic, in America, a book gets published. According to the source, it's called Jesus is Coming.
Jesus is Coming. And this book was popular.
Hugely popular, sold millions. And it had a profound impact, especially on American Christians, American evangelicals.
What was the core message that resonated so much?
The central idea, as the source presents it, was a specific prophecy. Jesus Christ would only return to earth after the Jews had reestablished their own nation in Palestine.
Wow. Okay, so for these Christians, helping create a Jewish state became like a religious imperative.
Exactly. It tied into their own core beliefs about the second coming. And this wasn't just passive belief. The source says American Christians started writing letters, thousands of them, to the U.S. president, lobbying him, urging the U.S. government to actively help create an Israeli state in Palestine.
So suddenly there's this powerful wave of public support in America for the Zionist cause.
Which emboldened the Zionists immensely. They felt they could finally go public. And they did. They held their first official public Zionist meeting in Switzerland.
And it was at this meeting that Theodor Herzl, the leader of the movement, made that incredibly bold prediction.
Yeah, famous prediction. He stood up and declared to the world, remember, this seemed completely impossible at the time that within 50 years, Jews would have their own country in Palestine. And the source makes a point of noting, this prediction came true exactly 50 years later.
Incredible timing. And they even revealed the flag at that meeting.
The first Israeli flag, yeah. Published right there. But Herzl knew there was a huge obstacle. He sent people to Jerusalem to scope things out.
And the report back wasn't exactly encouraging.
No. The secret message, according to the source, was basically, the bride, meaning Jerusalem, is beautiful, but she's married to someone else. Palestine was firmly under the control of the Ottoman Empire, ruled by Sultan Abdul Hamid. And he was known for being a very strong, unyielding leader.
So Herzl tries to negotiate.
He does. He makes a direct offer to Sultan Abdul Hamid. The Ottoman Empire had massive debts at the time, Herzl basically said, we, the Zionists, will pay off your entire empire's debt if you give us Palestine.
And the Sultan's response?
Absolute refusal. The source quotes him saying something incredibly defiant, like, even if you cut my body into pieces, I will never give you Palestine.
Okay, so negotiation is off the table. Direct conflict is brewing.
Exactly. The source marks this moment as the real start of the open conflict between the Ottoman Sultanate and the Zionist movement.
Since the Ottomans wouldn't budge, the Zionists needed a powerful ally to help them achieve their goal.
Right. So they turned back to their, quote, old friend, as the source puts it, the British Empire, the ones they'd helped finance previously.
Did Britain just agree immediately?
Not quite. The source says Britain initially offered them other places, Uganda, maybe Argentina, places within the British Empire they could potentially settle.
But the Zionists were focused only on Palestine.
Absolutely insistent. The source quotes their reasoning. Just like Germans belong in Germany and the French in France, Jews belong in Palestine. It was non-negotiable for them. So they started actively working toward weakening the Ottoman Sultanate.
And then comes the catalyst, World War I.
The Great War. And Britain, embroiled in this massive conflict, once again needs money. So they turned to
The Rothschild family.
You got it. They approached the Rothschilds for financial backing. And this time, the Zionists, represented by the Rothschilds, had a very specific price.
Palestine.
Exactly. The source says Britain made a direct promise. Help us win the war, help us defeat the Ottoman Caliphate, and when we take Palestine, we will establish a state for you there, a new state of Israel.
And with that promise made,
Jews worldwide sided with the British Empire against the Ottomans and their allies. Britain, with the support and its own military might, relatively easily defeated the Ottomans and took control of Palestine.
And then came the famous Balfour Declaration.
Yes. After the victory, the British Foreign Minister, Arthur Balfour, sent a formal letter to Walter Rothschild, who was seen as the most powerful Jewish figure globally at that time. The letter explicitly stated Britain's commitment, its full support for the creation of a Jewish national home in Palestine. And the source adds an interesting detail. Balfour himself was apparently inspired by that book, Jesus is Coming.
So the political backing is there, the land is under British control, but there was still a major practical problem, wasn't there? Demographics.
A huge problem. When Britain made this promise in 1917, the source states Jews were only about 10% of Palestine's population. Muslims were 90%. You can't just declare a state like that. The Zionists knew they desperately needed more Jews in Palestine.
How do they plan to solve that? Before we get to the solution, the source points out something happening back in Europe, particularly Germany, that became relevant.
Right. While the Zionists were making political moves, there was backlash brewing in Germany. The source explains that many Germans realized the Rothschilds, whose banking empire started in Germany, had thrown their financial weight behind Britain, Germany's enemy in World War I.
So a feeling of betrayal.
Yeah, a perception that German Jews had betrayed Germany in the war. This created a lot of resentment, fertile ground for anti-Semitism.
And this resentment is something Adolf Hitler tapped into.
Exactly. According to the source, Hitler rose to power partly by convincing Germans that Jews were to blame for their defeat in WWI. Once in power, he started targeting Jewish businesses, even shutting down the original Rothschild Bank in Germany after 200 years.
And then tragically, Hitler's regime expands across Europe, leading to the Holocaust.
Yes, the systematic persecution and mass murder of Jews across conquered territories. An absolutely horrific period.
But the source connects this tragedy, this horrific crisis, back to the Zionist goal in Palestine.
It presents a grim, perhaps opportunistic view. It suggests the Rothschilds and the Zionist movement used this crisis, Jews fleeing persecution and death in Europe, to facilitate their migration to Palestine. It became a primary destination for refugees.
So the Holocaust, while devastating European Jewry, inadvertently led to a massive increase in the Jewish population of Palestine.
That's the dynamic the source describes. By the end of World War II, after this influx of refugees, the Jewish population in Palestine had jumped from around 10% to over 30%. A huge demographic shift in just a couple of decades.
Okay, so World War II ends. Britain is victorious but exhausted, its empire crumbling. India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka gain independence. And the Zionists in Palestine see their chance.
They do. They go to the British and say, okay, you won. You promised us a state. Time to deliver.
But Britain is hesitant now because of the demographics. Still only 30% Jewish.
Right. It's a much trickier situation than maybe they anticipated back in 1917. The majority population is still Palestinian Muslim. So Britain, reluctant to make a decision that would inevitably cause conflict, decides to pass the buck. They refer the whole issue to the newly formed United Nations.
And the UN comes up with a plan the source is quite critical of.
Extremely critical. It calls the UN Partition Plan of 1947 the most stupid decision in UN history.
Wow. Why such harsh words? What was the plan?
The plan was to divide Palestine into three parts. Part 1, the largest share of the land, would go to the Jewish population, who were about 33% at this point. Part 2, a smaller share, would go to the Palestinian Muslim population, who were about 66%. And Part 3, Jerusalem, would become an international city controlled by neither side.
So the minority group gets the majority of the land.
That's how the source frames it, yeah. It uses the analogy of dividing a cake. Half goes to 3 people, the other half to 7 people. Calls it very unfair.
How was the plan received?
Well, the Jewish leadership and population celebrated it. Finally, international recognition for a state. But the Palestinian Muslim Committee flatly rejected it. Completely unacceptable to them.
And the leader of that committee was Amin al-Husseini.
Yes, the Grand Mufti. And the source notes he was already a controversial figure, deeply disliked by the British and the Zionists because he had actually supported Hitler during World War II, even met with him, and apparently wanted to raise a Muslim army to fight for the Nazis. So his rejection probably didn't help matters from the perspective of the UN or Britain.
So the UN plan is proposed, accepted by one side, rejected by the other. Stalemate.
Not for long. Following the Arab rejection, the Zionist leader David Ben-Gurion made a dramatic announcement. Standing under a big portrait of Theodore Herzl, he declared, and this source emphasizes this, quote, "Not half of Palestine, but all of Palestine will be ours," and that he formally declared the independence of the State of Israel.
And this was exactly 50 years after Herzl's prediction.
Exactly 50 years, according to the source. A powerful symbolic moment for them.
And how did the world react to this unilateral declaration?
Recognition came incredibly fast. Just 11 minutes after Ben-Gurion's announcement, the United States, already a superpower, officially recognized Israel. The Soviet Union followed soon after, along with other nations.
Any Islamic nations?
Only one at that time, the source points out, Iran, which was then under the rule of Reza Shah.
So Israel declares independence, gets immediate major power recognition. What happened next?
War. The very next day, 5 neighboring Arab countries attacked Israel, aiming to destroy the new state.
But Israel survived.
It did. The source says that with help from America and Britain, the Israeli forces managed to defeat the combined Arab armies. And in doing so, Israel actually expanded its territory, taking control of land that the UN partition plan had originally allocated to the proposed Palestinian state.
Okay, so Israel wins the war, gains more land. But that demographic issue still hasn't gone away, right? Even with the new territory, there were still more Arabs than Jews within the borders Israel now controlled.
Exactly. The Muslim population was still roughly double the Jewish population inside the expanded Israel. This remained a fundamental challenge for the new state, aiming to be a Jewish state.
So, according to the source,
Yeah.
what was Israel's solution to this demographic problem?
The source describes Israel's first major action after independence as the systematic and permanent expulsion of Palestinians, people whose families had lived in that land for, in many cases, 1,000 years.
Expulsion? How did that happen?
It was widespread and forceful, according to the material. The source claims Israel destroyed hundreds of Palestinian villages, major towns too, essentially wiping them off the map to prevent people from returning.
And what about Palestinians who refused to leave their homes?
Here the source makes some very serious allegations. It claims that for those who wouldn't leave, Israel resorted to extreme tactics, including poisoning water wells and pipes to kill them or force them out through making the areas uninhabitable.
That's a very strong claim. And the result of these actions?
A massive population shift in a very short time. The source states that within about a year, around 800,000 Palestinian Muslims either fled or were expelled, and almost simultaneously about 700,000 Jews from around the world immigrated into Israel, often moving into the very homes the Palestinians had left behind.
So in just 1 year, the demographics flipped.
Dramatically. The Jewish population went from being a minority to being the clear majority, maybe 60–70%, within the territory Israel controlled. And the source concludes by stating that this strategy, displacing Palestinians to make way for Jewish settlement, erasing the Palestinian presence, wasn't just a one-off event in 1948, but something Israel has continued to use regularly to maintain Jewish dominance and ensure Zionist control over the land.
Wow. Okay.
Great.
That's quite a journey we've just traced. 2,000 years of history, shifting alliances, from friendship to enmity and back again. economic power building empires and enabling statehood, religious prophecies driving political action, and finally, the establishment of Israel and its immediate dramatic aftermath. It's incredibly complex.
It really is. And this deep dive, based on the sources you provided, just shows how tangled history, belief, and power really are. You see how something that looks like a very modern conflict today actually has these roots stretching back millennia. It's a powerful reminder, I think, that the headlines we read now are often just the latest chapter in a very, very old story.
Absolutely. So, thinking about this whole narrative, this 2,000-year saga, what does it really teach us, about the bigger picture, about that constant human drive for land, for identity, for security? We see how economic muscle can literally redraw maps, how deeply held beliefs and prophecies can mobilize millions, how historical grievances, real or perceived, can echo across centuries and fuel conflict. Are there patterns here, the displacement, the strategic alliances, the relentless pursuit of a homeland that maybe help us understand other conflicts around the world, other moments in history? It certainly makes you think about how these powerful forces continue to shape our world today.